On the third day of the fast, Esther ended her prayers. She took off the garments she wore for worship and put on her royal robes. Dressed in all her splendor, she first called upon the all-seeing God and Savior. Then she took 2 maids with her. She leaned gently upon one of the maids for support, while the other followed behind, carrying Esther's flowing train. Her radiant and beautiful countenance made her look happy, but Esther's heart was filled with fear. She passed through all the doors of the court and stood before the king. He was sitting upon his royal throne, clothed in his royal robes, resplendent with gold and precious stones. He was awesome to behold. Looking up, his face blazed with both royal splendor and fierce anger. The queen staggered, turning pale and faint, and then leaned weakly upon the shoulder of the maid in front of her. Then God changed the king's spirit to become gentle. He hurried from his throne with concern and lifted her up in his arms until she came to. He comforted her by saying, "What is the matter, Esther? I am your husband. Don't be afraid. You will not die, for this law was made for others, not for you. You may approach the throne." The king raised the gold scepter and touched her neck with it. He embraced her and said, "Speak to me." She answered, "I saw you, my lord, as an angel of God, and my heart was fearful because of your glory. For you are wonderful, my lord, and your face reflects such grace." While she was speaking, she fainted and collapsed. The king was very concerned, and all his servants tried to help her. On the third day of the fast, Esther put on her royal robes and entered the inner court of the palace, just across from the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her and held out the golden scepter to her. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. Then the king asked her, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." And Esther replied, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for the king." The king turned to his attendants and said, "Tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet, as Esther has requested." So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "Now tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." Esther replied, "This is my request and deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this is all about." Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet. But when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went on home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, and boasted to them about his great wealth and his many children. He bragged about the honors the king had given him and how he had been promoted over all the other nobles and officials. Then Haman added, "And that's not all. Queen Esther invited only me and the king himself to the banquet she prepared for us. And she has invited me to dine with her and the king again tomorrow." Then he added, "But this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew just sitting there at the palace gate." So Haman's wife, Zeresh, and all his friends suggested. Set up a sharpened pole that stands 25 meters tall, and in the morning ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king. This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. That night the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. In those records he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? The king asked. His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." "Who is that in the outer court?" the king inquired. As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole he had prepared. So the attendants replied to the king, "Haman is out in the court." "Bring him in," the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, "What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me?" Haman thought to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So he replied, "If the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with a royal emblem on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. And let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, 'This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor.'" "Excellent," the king said to Haman. "Quick, take the robes and my horse, and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested." So Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square, shouting, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." Afterwards Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home dejected and completely humiliated. When Haman told his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisers and his wife said, "Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him." While they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly took Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. On this second occasion, while they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared, for my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king. Who would do such a thing?" King Xerxes demanded. "Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you?" Esther replied, "This wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy." Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. In despair he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. The king exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace, before my very eyes?" And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 25 meters tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. Then impale Haman on it," the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. On that same day King Xerxes gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king how they were related. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. Then Esther went again before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop the evil plot devised by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. Again the king held out the golden scepter to Esther. So she rose and stood before him. Esther said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor with him, and if he thinks it is right, and if I am pleasing to him, let there be a decree that reverses the orders of Haman son of Hammedatha the Agagite, who ordered that Jews throughout all the king's provinces should be destroyed, for how can I endure to see my people and my family slaughtered and destroyed?" Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "I have given Esther the property of Haman, and he has been impaled on a pole because he tried to destroy the Jews. Now go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want, and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever has already been written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring can never be revoked." So on the 25th of June the king's secretaries were summoned, and a decree was written exactly as Mordecai dictated. It was sent to the Jews and to the highest officers, the governors, and the nobles of all the 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. The decree was written in the scripts and languages of all the peoples of the empire, including that of the Jews. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Mordecai sent the dispatches by swift messengers, who rode fast horses especially bred for the king's service. The king's decree gave the Jews in every city authority to unite to defend their lives. They were allowed to kill, slaughter, and annihilate anyone of any nationality or province who might attack them or their children and wives, and to take the property of their enemies. The day chosen for this event throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 7th of March of the next year. This is a copy of Mordecai's letter. This letter is from the great King Xerxes to the governors of his 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia and to our loyal subjects. Greetings. For many people, the more good things they receive from their benefactors, the more proud they become. Not only do they seek to oppress the king's subjects, but they are unable to enjoy the success given them. So they turn against their own benefactors. Not only do they drive out gratitude from others, but they also become proud from the flattery of those who don't know what good really is. They think they can escape the justice of God, who sees all things and hates evil. Often higher authorities are sweet-talked into granting public offices to friends, who then use their position to kill innocent people. In this way they involve the higher authority in irreparable tragedies, for they deceive the well-meaning rulers with false trickery. Now this is proved both from ancient records and even more by recent events, which show the kind of evil that results from the destructive behavior of unworthy rulers. In the future we must provide for the peace and quiet of all the people of the kingdom. We must change our methods and use a more just process for judging matters that are brought to our attention. For example, we received Haman son of 𝗕𝗶𝗶𝗴𝗏, a Macedonian, so he was not even Persian and did not share in our kind nature, as a guest. He benefited from the kindness that we show towards all people, so much so that everyone called him Father and bowed down to him, regarding him as second in power only to the king. But he was so filled with arrogance that he tried to deprive us of our kingdom and our lives. With unbelievable craftiness and deceit, he has sought the destruction of Mordecai, our constant benefactor who saved our lives, of Esther, the blameless royal partner, and of their entire nation. In this way, Haman thought that he could make us defenseless and then transfer the kingdom of the Persians to the Macedonians. But we have found that the Jews, who were slated to be slain by that most hated man, are not evil. In fact, they have just laws, and they are the children of the living God, the Most High and greatest God. It is by this God's direction that the kingdom has been excellently maintained for us as well as for our ancestors. Therefore, you should disregard the letters sent by Haman son of 𝗕𝗶𝗶𝗴𝗏. He and all his household were impaled for this crime at the gates of Susa. God, who rules over all things, has swiftly repaid him as he deserved. Post a copy of this letter in all public places, and let the Jews follow their own laws. On the 7th of March you must aid them in their time of hardship so that they may defend themselves against those who will attack them. For the all-powerful God has turned this day of destruction into a day of joy for his chosen people. You will celebrate this day as another important festival. From now on, Jews and loyal Persians will remember this day as a time of deliverance, but those who plot against us will only be reminded of their downfall. Every single province and city that does not obey these orders will be viciously destroyed by spear and fire. Their land will become uninhabitable for human beings, and even the wild animals and birds will stay away. A copy of this decree was to be issued as law in every province and proclaimed to all peoples, so that the Jews would be ready to take revenge on their enemies on the appointed day. So urged on by the king's command, the messengers rode out swiftly on fast horses bred for the king's service. The same decree was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. Then Mordecai left the king's presence, wearing the royal robe of blue and white, the great crown of gold, and an outer cloak of fine linen and purple. And the people of Susa celebrated the new decree. The Jews were filled with joy and gladness and were honored everywhere. In every province and city, wherever the king's decree arrived, the Jews rejoiced and had a great celebration and declared a public festival and holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews themselves, for they feared what the Jews might do to them.